this panel's a sell-side panel discussing sort of the overview of the year, because it's been quite an interesting year, with lots of interesting things happening in the industry, from GDPR to bid caching. Before we just jump in, I just want to let the panel introduce themselves briefly so we can kick off things.
Sure. Hi, my name's James Prudhomme. I'm the head of international for Index Exchange, so basically responsible for all of Index Exchange's business outside of North America.
Cool. I'm Austin Lee. I work at Scout24 and lead the data advertising ventures there, basically anything to do with monetizing our data.
Hi, I'm Sarang Ganesh, heading up advertising for eBay Kleinanzeigen, basically trying to monetize all the ad properties on eBay Kleinanzeigen. Already working for 10 years for eBay.
Congratulations, sir.
Thanks. I did it.
You did it. 10 years. I've been doing this for 10 years as well. Time to retire.
That's an accomplishment.
Anyway, we'll start with Sarahan, actually, because it's a good place to start. Talk about the last 12 months. We've had a tumultuous year, I would say. The introduction of GDPR and some sort of a lot of sell-side scrapping, I would call it, between all the SSPs. It's quite interesting. We'll let James talk about
yeah,
it.
Looking at index.
But let's talk about your perspective of the year, particularly from the GDPR perspective, and how it's affected your business in Germany.
So, I mean, there was a lot of noise and distraction with that one, right? And also the different interpretations into the market, which didn't make it easier for the publishers as well as for the agency to understand what the next steps are. As soon as it arrived and it gets more clear, we have seen an impact on our business, obviously, right? Due to the interpretation, not because of the law, because the law was, from my perspective, pretty clear. Which also required a lot of effort on the publisher sides to really, again, being distracted from really the focus stuff which we should be looking rather forward. And that was pretty unfortunate how that was treated in general in the last couple of months. Yeah, looking forward that we will be passing that GDPR topic. I mean, there will be another discussion around e-privacy coming up, but yeah, let's use the time in between and have a good preparation.
Did it affect the revenue? Did it have a major effect on you? Because obviously I've heard different stories, particularly with Google not being part of the IAB framework in Europe, that it did affect revenue for some publishers. But did it affect your revenue?
It did. I mean, that's what I mentioned with the interpretation, right? I mean, every DSP had another interpretation, including also Google from a specific point of view. And we have seen spends on specific partners going down. On the other end, other partners profited from that. But overall, I think there was also an impact, but we could also mitigate that impact as much as possible.
Awesome. I mean, from your perspective, in terms of the resource required to put this in place, and obviously what's happened to your business, has it had a major effect this year?
I think I can agree with the sentiment that I think there was a lot of noise, and then the immediate impact was probably some uncertainty through buyers, but it seemed to be more of a case of caution, waiting to see if there was any major impact and then sort of resume activity. So I think maybe we saw a slight impact maybe for the first month or so. And I think as everyone's still waiting for work with Google and Facebook to occur out of this, I think there hasn't necessarily been a large impact of it. More caution and, yes, resource to understand what's going on, but not a distinct change in behaviour.
Yeah.
I don't think the full story on GDPR has been written yet.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, I woke up at 5 o'clock this morning and I went through all the industry papers, and somehow I got down a e-privacy rabbit hole. I don't know how you do that at 5 o'clock in the morning, but I did. And there was a story about how some cases are coming at the end of the year. Big fines are coming for certain companies. Didn't name any companies, so be interesting to see how that pans out.
I think, as Sirhan said, e-privacy is still yet to be determined, so there's going to be some impact there. And also, as mentioned, some of the big players haven't really established their clear position on GDPR yet. There's also an action in front of the Privacy Commissioner in the UK, taken specifically by a privacy advocate that basically says, you know, the online advertising industry needs to be shut down. Is kind of the premise, right? So, you know, I think that the legislation itself was pretty ambiguous when it came out. Everybody sort of struggled to figure out how to interpret it, and lots of discussions around contracts and data sharing agreements and all of these things. Everyone's gotten to a position now where there seems to be a little bit of calm in the marketplace, and everyone's just kind of proceeded business as usual. But it could, in fact, be the calm before the storm. So there could be more coming on GDPR, whether that's through interpretation at the courts, or whether that's through the privacy legislation, or even just the individual actions of some of the large players in the ecosystem.
Do you think that the legislation is so subjective? It feels to me it's subjective, like in terms of how, like the French, the way they're interpreting is it like it's a, you know, it's a right to show advertising, like it's in the user's interest. They're not even doing all those horrible pop-ups that we see every day.
Different countries in Europe have definitely interpreted the legislation differently and acted on it differently. And a lot of that is within the context of their own privacy laws that may have existed previously. So Germany, for example, had you know, relatively strict laws and rules around online privacy before GDPR came out. So GDPR came out, and a lot of, you know, the marketplaces reacted differently based on their previous experience. You know, over time, that's probably going to start to level out a little bit, and we'll see how strictly enforced the, you know, European Commission decides to go. Right, if they start making examples out of people, then I think you'll see, you know, countries fall in line pretty quickly. But I don't think that, you know, I don't think anyone's goal in GDPR is to prevent people from serving ads. It's just to bring, you know, some rules, some regulations, and try to rebuild a little bit of trust with users. So I think the objectives of it are okay.
Let's just flip it on its head, right? And say this is an opportunity for premium publishers like yourselves. Do you see, like, obviously more marketers now are being very, very strict about where they're spending their money, right? So they're less likely to buy long tail, and now that's an opportunity for you to take that budget because, you know, you're safe environments. Do you see that as an opportunity, Sarah?
That's a really good question, right? I mean, that's indeed an opportunity for those publishers handling with a lot of data, and especially, I mean, also looking at Scout, understanding purchase intent and really use that contextual data to be the main lever to buy inventory, right? I mean, that's definitely one of the USPs. We are going out and try to tackle that. I think for eBay Kleinanzeigen or for any e-commerce publishers in general, that should be an opportunity. And also, there's also some other activities like consortiums regarding net IDs or unified IDs. That's also an opportunity to really be one other competitor in the market against the big ones like Google and
do you envision a single sign-on for most sites? Do you? I wouldn't call it like a digital footprint or password as such. It doesn't have to be a password, like a username and password. It could be something else. But could you see that unique ID working in your favor? And maybe that's the trade-off, right? As James has alluded to, the ad tech ecosystem has got some questionable behaviour, right, which the European Union has rightly addressed, right? But in doing so, they've not understood the nuances of our industry, particularly the strength of the duopoly, right? Facebook and Google have 80% of our market, right? I know they're never going to come to an ATS event, so I slag them off. But they have 80% of our market, right? So it's up to us to try and figure out how we can compete with them. And this is an opportunity for us to address that. But do you think that single sign-on is a coming thing for maybe German publishers, e-commerce publishers, news publishers, etc.?
I suspect in Germany it will have more of a focus, maybe being such a privacy-centric market. I think it's more a case of where the concept becomes reality. I think that's the difficulty to envisage publishers at scale coming together. I mean, I think you can talk to things like ads.txt as an example of where it's still reliant on the industry to adopt something centrally. I think whether you discuss how it impacts against the likes of Facebook and Google, it will help. But fundamentally, they're two markets in which the user is the key to their capabilities in terms of understanding who they are and understanding where they are. And I think that still is where those kind of concepts have to gather everyone together before you can start impacting them.
At Index, we've made a huge bet on identity. And not that there will be one universal common ID, but today we transact something like 250 different user identifiers, almost on every single bid request that goes through the exchange. So that's just not sustainable. It takes up too much infrastructure, it takes up too much bandwidth, and the accuracy or the efficacy of it is definitely called into question. We see a world where that goes down to maybe 4 or 5. And if the German market rallies around, either the NetID system and then
what's this NetID system?
Well, NetID, probably the two gentlemen from the German market will be more expert in it than I am. But effectively, it's a consortium of German publishers and advertisers that have gotten together to begin discussions around a common identifier and what that looks like. As I understand it, there's 2 initiatives in Germany specifically. Portugal, there's another one.
Yeah, I know Portugal got a very
French are starting to talk
strong
about
one, yeah.
it. So,
But surely that makes sense. I mean, that's user. I mean, look, I think that sometimes the trade-off gets lost in it, right? The user gets access content, and there has to be some kind of trade-off. And an ID, a login, it seems to be the fairest way to do that. Potentially.
I mean, both of these gentlemen work for businesses that are kind of login centric, so I'd kind of defer.
You're winners
to
then.
them.
You guys are winning already.
I mean, it's rather a requirement for what's probably coming up with the e-privacy, right? Currently, it's not really a big leverage or lever, but it's a good preparation in terms of how can we obtain consent. If we can do it on one side, it's basically enabled for all, right? If you're having a lot of publishers in place, you don't need to deal with that and lose probably users not being opted in, or at least for the first sessions.
Yeah.
So I think it's a requirement to build up that volume so that they are prepared when the rule applies or the regulation applies.
Okay. So let's talk a bit about the monetization stuff this year. There's a lot of debate going on between PMPs and programmatic guaranteed. The PMP market hasn't scaled as well as it could have. You hear a lot of complaints from various players, particularly publishers, who are implementing these deals all over the place and just not getting the fill they're getting. And then we're hearing about programmatic guarantee, that the IO market is trying to flip into that. So let's just talk about those 2 specific areas to begin with. Do you see sort of programmatic guarantee becoming the trading mechanism for buying media in the next couple of months, then 12 months?
I think that if you want to call it programmatic guaranteed,
well, it's obviously many terms.
Yeah, there's a number of different terms. What I do think is that marketers and advertisers have now shifted to buying programmatically, primarily driven by header bidding, right? So primarily driven by getting access to the inventory without having to go through the ad server, or without having to allow the ad server to be the final decision maker in which impressions they get. And so I think it fundamentally comes down to control. Control, transparency into the supply chain for a marketer or for an agency to understand exactly what sites their campaigns are going to run on, to be able to decide on, have their DSP decide which impressions they want to buy, not to have the ad server decide which impressions they get awarded. Absolutely, I think that will continue to have legs and will continue to take, as we describe it as moving paper into platforms. So moving out of IOs and into programmatic platforms. And we've seen a huge trend throughout the world in that this year. And I think we'll continue to see that in the next 2 or 3 years.
Now, that's particularly a big thing in Germany, Austin. The IO market is still as strong here as it is in the UK. So do you see a flip from that world into this programmatic guaranteed world? Particularly because I think, you look at PMP, you think this is a great opportunity to get access to that brand budget within the agencies, but it hasn't panned out that way. So how do we get, committed spend, if you will?
I think it still comes down to an expertise question. I think in market is being able to have the conversation to understand the mechanisms that go with it. I think ultimately buyers are still focused on, where do I get the best result at the cheapest price? And I think defining if that mechanism is via guaranteed or not, I think is still an open question. There's a transition certainly in Germany towards it, and it's certainly slower than other markets. And I've spent most of my time in Australia, and that's programmatic is there, and it's still a piece that is growing and growing here. I think the mechanism is still an open question about whether people are really concerned about if they do it via P&P. It still requires a conversation. It still requires someone speaking with someone else to understand what is available, how it is available. And sometimes I think I'd argue that the people in control of that, the buyers in control of that, don't necessarily understand the mechanism. All they care about is, can I get a result? And can I get it at the cheapest price? That's what they're measured on, so that's what they'll focus on.
That sounds depressing.
No.
You want more money. Sarah, are you seeing something similar as well, or the conversation a bit different?
I mean, generally we can see a move from IO to programmatic, and obviously, accordingly to that, we see also a growth in programmatic deals, slightly in programmatic guaranteed. There are obviously some advantages, right? You have a direct relationship with the customer. You can have a better consultation with them. I'll also recommend other stuff to enrich the campaign with data you have, and that's really important to make the buy at the end more efficient. What I see as a problem currently is if you think about scaling up programmatic deals, I mean, it also costs operational effort, right? I mean, and that's where I see the agencies are not yet set up with the teams and probably the competencies as well to really cover that in a big scale perspective. So I'm rather in favor of okay, let's keep it maybe still open, have a direct relationship, but give them as much as possible information about us, and also try to give them recommendations in a more automated way instead of setting up individual deals for the publisher or even for the agency.
So this year's been interesting as well. There's been a lot of publisher initiatives around building bespoke technology around monetization. And it's quite an interesting one because there's a debate now. How do publishers make more money? What's the sort of like? So header bidding came along and it's revolutionised a lot of. It was kept Google honest basically, you know. But in terms of sort of like the likes of Ozone and Gravity and those type of initiatives from publishers, and they are building specific technology pieces. I mean, how difficult is that going to be? And do you see that as a trend going forward? I know obviously you've got your own technology company, James, but do you see that as a trend going forward in terms of publishers building bespoke stuff? Because we've seen it with Perch. They built their own tools, which has now been a part of Future Publishing. Is that right? They were acquired. So, and Ozone is obviously a collective of all the various publishers. So how do you see that playing out? Is that something you can work with, James, or do you see a trend of this bespoke technology in space?
I think that it's definitely a sign that publishers want to be in control, right? For so many years, publishers have not been in control of their own ad stack. The decisioning in their systems has really largely been left up to, DoubleClick or whatever ad server they're using. And I think that publishers have felt really frustrated by that, justifiably so. Header bidding was certainly a big step in terms of putting publishers in control and putting them back in control. And I think that you're seeing publishers, now that they've got some control, they want a lot more. So we've always been focused on giving publishers control, allowing them to decide, exactly which vendors they work with, providing them with technology that allows them to work with multiple vendors across the ecosystem. So I think that, in the examples that you mentioned, Ozone, Gravity, those are really largely around data, and the publishers are really trying to figure out the challenge of how do we scale data in a world that's dominated by Google, Facebook, and Amazon, and that's a really, really big challenge. So they've decided that coming together into these cooperatives is, kind of one potential solution or one potential approach to that. So I think we will absolutely see more of that. I think it's going to take time, from a programmatic point of view, being able to activate against that data. Google and Facebook, yes, have a lot of raw data, but they also have thousands of engineers building products and systems and tools to allow them to activate value out of that data. And so, and I would argue that even eBay is not far behind on that, right? There's thousands of engineers at eBay, and you guys spend a lot of time, thinking about data. So I think, the average newspaper publisher or magazine publisher doesn't necessarily have the resources to do that. So coming together, investing money into these cooperatives, I think that makes a lot of sense for them overall.
Is that a trend you're seeing in Germany as well, Austin? Is that something that's happening here? Publishers working in conjunction with each other to build technology?
It's probably not an area I have a great deal of expertise in. I think we see it with initiatives like the Net ID as an example of where publishers are going together. I don't know if there's necessarily a large drag yet in that space. I think the point around a focus on data is still probably where the conversations sit, and then the question is, what is the best system, or who is the best partner to work with to actually better what you have?
Is that something? Is eBay looking at building specific tech, like the way Purchase, and is that something you guys are thinking about internally?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, in Germany, we see some publishers trying to build their own technology, right?
Badly.
Partly, but that's also due to the reason that, I mean, it's not their core business, right? So accordingly, they don't have the resources to build a technology like that, such as Google or Facebook. They have thousands of engineers, as I said, right? What we are doing is, I mean, we need to differentiate between eBay Classifieds and also eBay. I mean, there are some efforts, of course, to look into that and also try to build similar systems to be more independent and also plug in demand partners, advertisers directly into their stack. But obviously that also takes time, because the discrepancy where those guys are, like Google, and where we started, it's ages. So we're investing a lot, but it will take time. I think there will be a time in between where you need to focus on like the biggest spenders and put some white label solutions for them, which probably makes up 60-80% of your revenues. But for quantity-wise,
native or rich media or something like that.
Say
big formats, sort of like, or bespoke formats for.
Not only, I mean, it's not only about the format, but about the backbone of your technology, right? So talking about, again, having direct relationship with the biggest trading desk, having a direct relationship with the biggest spenders, such as, I don't know, Otto or any other, Check24 or whatever in Germany, and have a discussion with that one and say, okay, let's have these direct relationships maintained. I understand my data, I understand my user, I can give you much more context and help you to drive revenues also on your side, and keep all the others, which takes a lot of administrational effort, really to the marketplaces. That's not our business. So we need to iterate that in a couple of steps, I guess.
It also comes down to a question of infrastructure, and you know, Sirhan alluded to this. We operate 9,000 servers around the world, including close to 1,000 here in Germany in Frankfurt. And so we allow publishers to exercise whatever degree of customization they need to do on our system, and they can do a lot of things that address their own bespoke needs. But we provide for them the infrastructure and the connectivity to the buy side and to their data companies and to their analytics companies and all of that. So I don't think it's realistic for the average publisher to think about building that level of technology on their own, even frankly for somebody as large as eBay. And that's what, you know, programmatic companies do for them, right? That's why we're in business. That's why we make millions of dollars of investment into this infrastructure.
So there's been a lot of conversation this year as well about auction dynamics, first price auction versus second price auction. I want to start with the guys first over here in terms of where they stand in that, and then we can talk about the big caching sort of storm in the teacup that came on later on. But let's just talk about that specific thing, right? There's been a lot of debate around first party versus second party. Party price auction versus second price auction. So let's talk about that. Where do you stand in that? I mean, are you which would you favour? Obviously, the first price auction probably, but is there sort of a pull and drag from the buy side and sell side over this specific area?
We've been really starting early with first price. I think last year, mid of last year or so, with some SSPs, and other SSPs basically followed up. So basically all of our stack is now being on first price, which makes sense in a header bidding setup to really make sure that someone who's really bidding high really gets the impression, which wasn't the case before, right? And also, if you look at that more holistically outside of display, which we try to do is, we try to look at our ad slots and the ad channels really from an agnostic way. So we try to put display in competition with any other ad channels we have, like PLAs, tax advertising, internal corporations, and try to intermingle them. And first prices can only support that. You can't do it with the second price auction.
So like a proper holistic auction of all your different inventory sources.
That's the way to go, yeah.
Yeah. Austin?
I think we'd prefer first price at all stages, of course. I think our goal generally as a company is to facilitate best access for the buyer. So if that comes through a first price, then we'll facilitate it. If it's through second price, we facilitate it too.
James?
So I think that the goal of any programmatic auction is to get the buyer to bid truthfully, bid what they truly value, the impression and the user, bid how they truly value that at that moment in time. And in theory, and I'm sure, if there are any economists in the room, they'll tell you that in theory, a second price auction is the best way to do that. But I think that's only true in an environment when you have one large unified second price auction. The reality in our ecosystem is that we have dozens of nested auctions, starting with an auction that takes place in the DSP. Right? Which campaign is going to be eligible to submit the bid to the SSP? Then there's another auction in the SSP. Then some publishers have mediation on their page with their header bidder, and then the final auction. Three different steps where you're losing money every single time. Or where there's potential to lose money, or there's potential to kind of have hidden fees, or there's potential to do something nefarious. Yeah. And the only auction that really matters at the end of the day is the auction in the publisher's ad server, right? That's the one that decides whether, your bid is going to make you eligible to show the ad to that user. So in that environment, there's no question in my mind that a first price auction is the cleanest, most transparent, and really allows the advertiser to bid exactly how they value the ad. Right. Okay. The impression. Okay. Bid caching. You got pretty much hammered all year over this. All your competitors came out with knives. Everybody talked about you with forked tongues, all that kind of stuff. But I just think it's a bit of a... The publishers love it, obviously. But let's talk about how... What was wrong with it from a buy-side perspective, right? Like, never mind publishers, because if I was a publisher, I'd be loving bid caching, right? Every day of the week, because you make me more money. But from a buyer's perspective, they're the ones who are were probably most irate about the whole thing, and some of your competitors. So what was wrong from a buy-side perspective? What did you get wrong there? I mean, we continue to stand behind bid caching as an elegant solution to a problem around latency on publisher pages, right? The key thing in programmatic today is you have to be fast. Especially, the gentlemen on the stage here, both coming from classified websites. I mean, users are not waiting for ads to load on pages. They're just clicking through, they're looking at the products they want to look at. And so we saw bid caching and still see bid caching as a very elegant way of addressing that problem. We continue to stand behind it, and we do think that it will become a standard in the industry in the coming years.
Would you argue from e-commerce or a retailer perspective, it's perfect because the user's going from one page to another where context isn't a problem, but from a newspaper perspective or a content perspective, if you buy that user and they're moving down another page, the context of the page changes. Therefore, the whole reason for buying that user, there's a million reasons to buy that user. It could be behavioral, it could be contextual. That would be some from a buyer's perspective. Well, you've changed the sort of parameters about why I bought that user in the first place. Do you see my point?
I do see your point.
Okay.
And the important thing is to stay focused on the facts, right? And the main reason why a buyer places a bid is because they want to win that ad targeting that user.
That context.
In some cases, in that context, yes. And the context shouldn't change dramatically. The idea is that we want to be able to increase the buyer's ability to reach the users within the environments that they've targeted that user, and that was the whole reason that we put the solution in place.
Okay, I could sit here and do an hour on this, but we'll just move on. Thank you for defending that, though, James. Thank you. Just one last question, because we've got 5 minutes left, or something like that. ads.txt, right? Huge initiative. I would say a fabulous sort of cooperation from publishers and trade bodies alike and ad tech vendors. Fantastic, right? But Digiday did a survey of buyers, and the buyers are not really buying the ads.txt enabled sites as much as they should be. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what do you make of that from a publisher perspective? Because I feel publishers are probably the run to the litter in many ways, right? They they're at the end, they're the product, but they get very little of the money, right? From my perspective. So you do an amazing job of like saying, these are my verified sellers, right? To kind of counteract spoofing and fraud and all the rest of it. And yet the buyers are not buying these ads.txt enabled sites. What do you make of that, Sarah? Does that make you angry? Do you want to like rip up the place?
Yeah, I mean, there've been also a lot of noise, like, I mean, not as much as GDPR, but there was, right? And we've been really early by implementing the ads.txt, but haven't seen a lot of reaction from the buy side, right? So not a lot of these people are listening to that and accordingly buying to it, although they're communicating that really often.
Why though?
I think, I mean, the general idea was great, especially for such sites being really big in the market, right? So since a lot of, I don't know, spoofs is misusing like domains like eBay or eBay Kleinanzeigen and so on, it should have been in favor for us. But if nobody is listening, I mean,
I have a theory, right? Do you want to hear my theory? It's really good, right?
Okay.
Let's hear it.
It's really good, right? So if you're a brand advertiser, you're an idiot if you don't buy brands.txt. If you're based on brand metrics, right? So reach and frequency, all the rest of it, right? Touchy-feely metrics. If you're a performance advertiser, fraud, bot traffic is good for you, right? Why do I believe this? Think about this here, right? I have a CPA goal, right? My goal is to hit that CPA, right? I want to buy as much cheap shit as possible to hit that CPA, right? Now, if you introduce ads.txt, right, you'll suddenly realize that the number of sites in the world that people go to is not infinite. It is finite, right? So the price of CPMs rise, right? So that means that if I'm a performance advertiser, I don't want your prices to rise. I want as much fraud in there because I'm happy to buy fraud as long as one of your users convert, right? How do you feel about that, Thierry?
That's
Does anybody agree with me?
it's
Thank you. Few random. But I believe that I genuinely.
I would love to believe that.
No,
it's really interesting.
So I do not believe that. I do think that buyers know this is happening, right? And this is the reason why the entire industrial advertising industry, performance advertising, will fall apart because they'll realize it's only a finite number of people. Think about it. On your daily journey, right? Are you going to 100 fucking sites or are you going to 6? Six? See,
You're
6
right.
sites.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about my theory?
I think that I was surprised by the statistic as well when I saw the Digiday survey that more buyers aren't buying ads.txt.
Really, were you surprised?
I was quite surprised. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think anyone intentionally wants to buy fraudulent inventory. I don't think that's anyone's goal. There's no real users behind that fraudulent inventory.
It doesn't matter. If I'm a performance advertiser, right, and I don't want to pay £1 CPM for eBay, I want to pay 10p CPM because he's chasing the market, right? If the market is pressing the price, because this is what my theory is, bot traffic is artificially keeping prices down for publishers, right? Yeah. Would you agree?
I agree that fraudulent inventory is bad for publishers. Absolutely. It's like if Gucci was selling handbags at the night market in Hong Kong where there are tons of fake Gucci handbags for sale. That wouldn't be the best place for Gucci to open up their handbag store. Just in the same way that an exchange that is filled with fraudulent impressions is not the best place for a premium publisher to be selling their inventory.
No.
It still depends on the result. It's still always going to tie back to, fundamentally, well, as I think you said, buyers will always be focused on their objective.
My conversions are going to be cheaper because I'm buying you mixed with crap traffic.
If the premise is that fraudulent traffic goes through and achieves the goal you're after, I mean, it was put up before that CTR is still a primary measurement.
That's really that's short-term sighted, right? I mean, of course, it's performance and you might see better KPIs and so on, but from a branding perspective, probably you don't want to see your brand in an environment where it should be displayed. I mean, that's also something I can understand, and should be also considered for a more sustainable brand awareness.
And bots might be really good at clicking on ads, but they're not really good at entering their credit card information and actually buying things and having those things shipped out of warehouses, right?
I agree with that.
If they were, then we would have...
No, but I agree with that. But I think that premium publishers are basically sort of chasing prices down because they want to get yield, right? And that's what's causing artificial pressure on pricing. I genuinely, I would love to do a whole conference on this. I probably will do a conference on this, why bot traffic is good for performance advertising.
I mean, that's what advertisers or marketers should anyway do, right? Test it. I mean, see the results and also try to look at that from a long-term perspective and get the best out of it.
I think, and as much as I do appreciate your theory,
it's a conspiracy theory, but I thought it was good for 9:30 in the morning in Germany,
But I do think the problem is probably a little bit simpler than that, and I think it's just an awareness and education issue. I think just educating traders, educating buyers on what ads.txt is, why it's important, why they should only buy ads.txt based inventory. I just think it's incumbent upon the people on the sell side of the industry, publishers, exchanges, to just really get out in front of agencies and deliver that message, and to just keep delivering that message.
That message has been out in the market for 12 months. I don't buy that. But thank you for indulging my conspiracy theory. Gentlemen, thank you for your time, because we've run out of time. But thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for our fine panel.